Georges Méliès was a French film producer, director, actor, magician, and illustrator who was responsible for many of the early films he made in the early 20th century. He is considered one of the most important and influential figures in the history of cinema. Today, we will tell you who this magician, one of the pioneers of cinema, was, his films and the films he made with limited technology in the early years of cinema history, how he made them, and how these films became a turning point in the history of cinema. Méliès was born on December 8, 1861 in Paris to a wealthy family. Méliès worked for his father for years. In this way, he developed his skills as a technician. From an early age, he was passionate about art. After graduating from high school, Méliès goes to London to study. Here, he learns the language and receives training in illusion, which he has been interested in since his childhood. He takes his first lessons from Robert Houdin, whom he admires as a puppeteer and illusionist. During his studies in London, he started to visit the Egyptian Hall founded by the famous illusionist John Neville Maskelyne. Méliès, who was introduced to various illusion shows and the magical atmosphere of the stage, decided that he wanted to pursue this path, but his father was against it when he returned to this country. After working with his family, he started taking magic lessons in Paris. After the lessons he took, he participated in various performances and improved himself in this field. Georges Méliès, who earned a certain amount of money by selling the shares of his father's shop to his brothers, bought a small magic theater. He bought a theater in Paris called Theater Robert Houdin. He bought the theater from Jean Eugene Robert Houdin, who was also his mentor. In the theater, he performed the illusion shows he had seen in London, various comedy and drama plays with different actors. Upon discovering the cinematograph, the Lumiere brothers started making films. They wanted to offer these films to the public for the first time for a fee and screened their films in a cafe. Georges Méliès was among those who watched the films. He was impressed by the films and decided to make his own. After the screening, Méliès wanted to buy the machine from the Lumiere brothers, but they refused to sell him a copy of their device, believing that this invention had no future. Fortunately, Méliès found a similar device in London invented by Robert William Paul, who made scientific instruments. When he returned to Paris, a new challenge awaited him with the device. Because this film brought from London had no holes, all the boxes were hermetically sealed. So Méliès created a new camera for himself with the techniques he learned in the industry and started to shoot his own movies. But what he's going to film? Méliès started with what he knew best, tricks and illusions.
When Méliès's trip to the moon first came out, it became a success and it had a huge impact on filmmaking worldwide. The film was distributed overseas and most of the pirated copies reached the US almost immediately. So early American film directors saw the film, liked it very much and took it as a narrative model in terms of storytelling. Particularly Porter, the famous director of The Great Train Robbery, admitted he was greatly influenced by the continuity storytelling of Méliès. However, these filmmakers were not so much interested in the fantastical aspect of Méliès's imagination, mostly the narrative aspect of his films. Today, major contemporary film directors such as Martin Scorsese, Steven Spielberg, they also acknowledge Méliès's significance and that they were heavily inspired by his art.
Georges Méliès's Star Film Company starts producing films in 1896. He was able to present his first film screening on April 4th, 1896. Méliès began by screening other people's films, mainly those made for the kinetoscope, but within months he was making and showing his own work, his first films being one reel, one shot verse lasting about a minute, The Card Party. For his films, George sold all his possessions and went to great expense to build a film studio on land belonging to his family in Montreal, just outside Paris. Montreal Studios. Méliès would use the studio, complete with dressing rooms for the actors, set storage, secret hatches and light filtering devices for the rest of his film career. This purpose-built glass studio, the first of its kind, was raised after the Second World War and nothing remains of it.
Méliès's special effects. Now, one of the first editing techniques happened by accident. Méliès was filming the streets of Paris. His camera jammed. That's to say, it stopped recording, but Méliès was not aware of that. And it was filming a bus entering a tunnel in Paris. And when the camera began working again, his film jumped to a hearse, a funeral car entering the tunnel. So when they were watching the film, the bus suddenly transformed into a car, and the man walking in the sidewalk pavement transformed into women. So it had a comical effect. Therefore, Méliès, being an illusionist, thought of exploiting this trick further. So he began to experiment with these possibilities. Méliès also had experience in splicing films before he discovered jump cuts. Film historians, have examined his work and found he had refined his motion pictures by trimming the beginning and end of each of his cuts. Méliès implemented the double exposure technique by shooting a scene and rolling back his reel to the beginning and filming over the original film. And one of Méliès's most effective editing techniques is the dissolve. This film transition softened transitions between scene changes. Unlike the jump cut criticized for its jarring shift in image, the dissolve helps the viewer understand the temporal continuity in a film narrative. That's to say, when we see a dissolve, we understand that time has passed. Now, actually, it would take volumes to describe Méliès's impact on arts, on cinema in general. Just to give one example, I believe Méliès's dissolves, double exposures, and superimpositions were highly inspiring for the surrealist artists and filmmakers. The atmosphere he created and the visual objects he used reflected his imagination and eventually enabled surrealists to realize the artistic possibilities and potentials of this new medium, cinema. Méliès used multiple severed heads, for instance, heads flying, dancing, forming amazing compositions. These heads without bodies connecting and disconnecting with irrelevant objects in the film space suggest, for example, Louis Buñuel's surreal scenes in his films where irrelevant objects or humans and animals are brought together to create shock in the audience.
The Man with the Rubber Head, Méliès film techniques are a treasure trove of ingenuity. For example, The Man with the Rubber Head uses camera effects and plays with perspective. The rubber head effect was achieved using a wheelbarrow placed on skids. The actor and the wheelbarrow were approaching the stationary camera. This created the effect of the wheelbarrow growing as it approached the camera and shrinking as it moved away from the camera. Films with magic tricks allowed Méliès to create shots on screen that would not have been possible on stage. These shots included bodies being cut, flattened, and exploded, images of cutting of an actor's head or arm leg without killing him/her, copying people and objects, changing connections, transforming flying people and objects. Home Orchestra. In this film, Méliès filmed himself multiple times on the same film strip. In this way, he created the illusion that he was cloned. Live Playing Cards 1905. In this film, Méliès starts the camera recording and then stops it. He would then change the characters, restart the recording and continue. When you look at the stitched together footage, it looks like magic was really done with a seamless image. For Annoying Heads 1898, George Méliès used a clever method to give the illusion of objects disappearing. He placed a black cloak right in front of the camera. That way we could only see the severed heads. Mermaid 1904. In this film, Méliès used the same technique he had used in his previous film. But in this film, unlike the previous one, he filmed another piece of film on top of the black cover. Journey to the Moon 1902 was Méliès' most productive year when he made his most famous film, Journey to the Moon. Méliès drew inspiration from many sources such as Jules Verne, H.G. Wells, amusement parks, and operettas. The film took months to shoot and was costly. The film was 260 meters long and consisted of 30 scenes. The movie featured astonishing and impressive tricks that had never been seen before. The movie, which made a big impact all over the world, was copied without permission everywhere, especially in the USA. Méliès even had to open a branch office in the US to protect the rights to the movie.